My father's will contained a second key. The lawyer said he'd never seen it before. Hi everyone! Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The lawyer's office smelled like old paper and furniture polish. Mr. Garrison sat across from me, his fingers interlaced over a manila folder that contained what remained of my father's life. Outside, rain drummed against the windows, turning the October afternoon into something gray and indefinite. Your father was very thorough, Garrison said, sliding the folder toward me. The house, of course, the accounts, some investments, a few personal items he wanted you to have. I nodded, not really listening. My father had died 3 weeks ago, a heart attack in his study, alone, the way he'd lived most of his life. We hadn't been close. We'd barely been anything at all. Garrison opened the folder, spreading documents across the polished mahogany. Deeds, bank statements, an inventory of furniture that probably wasn't worth cataloging. Then he paused, his hand hovering over a small white envelope. There's one thing, he said slowly. This wasn't here when we drafted the will. He lifted the envelope. It was sealed, unmarked except for a slight discoloration along one edge, as if it had been handled many times before being tucked away. I don't understand, I said. Neither do I. Garrison's expression was carefully neutral, the kind lawyers perfect when they're trying not to show concern. When your father and I finalized everything 6 months ago, there was no envelope. I keep meticulous records. This appeared afterward. After he died? Before, maybe a week before. I came in one morning and found the will folder on my desk, not where I'd left it. This was inside. He turned the envelope over. Your father had a key to this office. He must have come in after hours. My chest tightened. That sounded like him. Secretive, deliberate, always operating in the margins of other people's awareness. Garrison handed me the envelope. I think you should open it. The paper was thick, expensive. Inside was a single brass key, old and tarnished, with an unusual notched pattern along its blade. No note, no explanation. Do you know what it opens? I asked. Garrison shook his head. I was hoping you would. I turned the key over in my palm. It was cold, heavier than it looked. Something about it made my skin prickle, though I couldn't say why. Your father was a private man, Garrison said quietly. In all the years I knew him, he never spoke about his past. Never mentioned family beyond you. When we discussed the will, he was very specific about certain things, but evasive about others. He paused. I got the impression he was protecting something, or someone. I pocketed the key without responding. My father had been protecting himself from me, from connection, from anything that might require him to be vulnerable. That's what I'd always believed. Now I wasn't sure. The house looked smaller than I remembered. 3 stories of Victorian architecture slowly surrendering to entropy, surrounded by overgrown hedges and a yard that hadn't been maintained in years. I parked in the gravel drive and sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the dark windows. I'd grown up here, but it had never felt like home. My father had occupied it like a tenant, not an owner. Keeping to certain rooms, certain routines, maintaining invisible boundaries I'd learned not to cross. The 3rd floor was his. The study was his. The basement was absolutely, unquestionably his. I'd asked once, when I was 8 or 9, why I couldn't go down there. Because some doors are closed for a reason, he'd said. Not angry, just final. You'll understand when you're older. I was 34 now. I still didn't understand. The key felt like a stone in my pocket as I climbed the porch steps. The realtor had left the lockbox combination in an email I hadn't read yet. I didn't need it. I had my old key, the one I'd never thrown away despite moving out 15 years ago. The door swung open with a groan. Inside, the air was stale and cold, thick with the smell of dust and something else. Something organic and faintly unpleasant, like old vegetables left too long in a cupboard. I flipped the light switch. Nothing happened. Perfect, I muttered, pulling out my phone and activating the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the hallway. Everything was exactly as I remembered. The faded wallpaper with its pattern of climbing roses, the narrow table with the ceramic bowl where my father had kept his keys, the stairs leading up into deeper shadow. I moved through the house slowly, opening curtains, checking rooms. The living room with its sunken couch and television that hadn't been replaced since the 90s. The kitchen with its avocado green appliances and Formica counters. My old bedroom, still containing the twin bed and desk I'd used in high school, now covered in a thin layer of dust. Everything felt frozen, preserved. Like a museum exhibit. Suburban life, late 20th century. My father's study was on the second floor. The door was closed but unlocked. Inside, late afternoon light filtered through gaps in the curtains, falling across the massive oak desk, the leather chair, the walls lined with bookshelves. This was where he'd spent most of his time. Reading, writing in notebooks I was never allowed to see, listening to records on the vintage turntable in the corner. Sometimes I'd wake in the middle of the night and hear music drifting up through the floorboards. Jazz, usually, something melancholy and complex. I sat in his chair. The leather creaked under my weight. On the desk were the ordinary artifacts of his final days. A coffee mug with a brown ring inside, a stack of mail, a fountain pen lying across an open notebook. I picked up the notebook. The last entry was dated the day before he died. The time is coming. I've done what I can to prepare, but I know it won't be enough. Some debts can't be paid. Some mistakes can't be undone. I only hope he doesn't hate me for what I've done, for what I'm about to do. If he finds it, he'll understand. Or he'll never forgive me. Either way, it ends. I read it 3 times, my pulse quickening. He'd never talked like this. Never been this raw, this vulnerable. Who was he writing about? What debt? What mistake? I pulled open the desk drawers one by one. Papers, receipts, rubber bands and paper clips. Nothing unusual, nothing that explained anything. The key burned in my pocket. I spent the next 2 hours searching. I tried every door, every lock, every cabinet. The key didn't fit anything. It was too old for the modern deadbolts, wrong size for the file cabinets, useless for the padlock on the basement door. Wait. The basement door. I stood at the top of the basement stairs, staring down into the darkness. I'd been avoiding this. Even now, decades later, I felt the old prohibition, the invisible line my father had drawn. The padlock was new industrial strength, installed sometime in the last few years. The key didn't fit it. But there was something else. A scratch on the door frame, recent, where the wood had been gouged. And below it, barely visible, another lock I hadn't noticed before. Smaller. Older. I inserted the key. It slid in smoothly, like it had been waiting. The lock turned with a soft click. The basement stairs descended into absolute blackness. My phone's flashlight beam seemed inadequate, swallowed by the dark. The smell was stronger here, earth and mildew and something chemical, like old paint or solvent. I went down slowly, one hand on the railing. The stairs creaked. Water dripped somewhere in the distance. At the bottom, I swept the light across the space. It was larger than I'd expected, stretching beneath the entire footprint of the house. Concrete floor, exposed beams, walls lined with metal shelving units containing boxes and old furniture covered in sheets. Normal. Disappointingly normal. I moved deeper, checking behind shelves, looking for anything out of place. The beam caught something in the far corner, a workbench, tools hanging on pegboard, cans of paint and varnish arranged by size. My father had never been handy. I couldn't remember him fixing anything, building anything. Why would he have a workshop? I approached the bench. The tools looked unused, their handles still bright with varnish. But the surface of the bench was scratched and stained, worn down by years of use. Underneath it, half hidden by shadow, was another door. Not a regular door, a section of wall that had been cut and reframed, painted to match the concrete, but not quite successfully. There was no handle, no obvious lock, just a small keyhole, brass like the key in my pocket. My hands were shaking as I knelt and inserted the key. It fit. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing darkness. I pointed my flashlight inside. A room. Maybe 10 feet square, windowless. The walls covered in some kind of soundproofing material acoustic foam panels, the kind you'd see in a recording studio. The floor was carpeted. There was a desk, a chair, a small cot against one wall, and boxes. Dozens of them stacked neatly, labeled with dates. I stepped inside. The air was different here, stale but controlled, like the room had been sealed. The flashlight beam moved across the desk, illuminating scattered papers, a cassette recorder, headphones. On the wall above the desk, someone had pinned photographs. Dozens of them. My breath caught. They were pictures of me as a child, playing in the yard. Me as a teenager, walking to school. Me as an adult, leaving my apartment in the city. Recent photos, some taken within the last year. My father had been watching me, documenting my life. But why? I pulled down one of the boxes, hands trembling. Inside were file folders, each labeled with a year. I opened the one marked with my birth year, documents, medical records. But not mine, someone else's. A woman named Sarah Connolly, pregnancy records, ultrasounds. And then, 6 months after my birth date, a death certificate. Sarah Connolly, deceased. Cause? Complications from childbirth. I sat down hard on the floor, the folder spilling from my hands. My mother. My father had told me she died when I was born. He'd never talked about her, never kept pictures, never even said her name. I'd assumed it was too painful for him. But here she was. Real. Documented. I grabbed another box, tore it open. More folders. One labeled Identity Documents. Inside, a birth certificate mine, but different. Different name, different location. And a second birth certificate, this one with my actual name, issued 2 years after the first. He'd changed my identity, falsified records. Why? The cassette recorder on the desk had a tape inside. My hand moved to it almost automatically, pressing play before I could think better of it. Static. Then my father's voice, younger than I remembered, but unmistakably his. June 14th, 1993. It's been 6 months since Sarah died. 6 months since I made the decision. I tell myself it was the only choice, that I did it to protect him. But the truth is, I'm not sure anymore. I'm not sure of anything except that they can't find him. They can't know he exists. A pause. Paper rustling. I've moved 3 times, changed names twice. The house in Hartford seems safe, remote enough. I've created a new identity for both of us. Thomas Grant is dead. Now we're Daniel and Henry Morrison, father and son. Clean slate. My mind reeled. Thomas Grant. That wasn't my father's name. Or it was, before he became Daniel Morrison, before he became my father. Sarah didn't want this, the voice continued. She thought we could run, that distance would be enough. But she didn't understand what they're capable of, what they'll do to protect themselves. So I made the choice for both of us. I took him and I disappeared. The recording clicked off. I sat in the darkness, my father's words echoing in my head. They can't find him. They can't know he exists. Who were they? What had my father been running from? I went through the boxes systematically now, no longer careful, just desperate for answers. More documents. More photographs. Some of people I didn't recognize, others of places that looked vaguely familiar but wrong somehow, like memories that don't quite align. Then I found the newspaper clippings. They were old, yellowed, dated from the early 90s. Headlines about a financial scandal, a company called Meridian Holdings, accused of fraud, money laundering, connections to organized crime. And in the center of it all, a photograph of a man identified as Thomas Grant, Chief Financial Officer, my father. The articles detailed an investigation, subpoenas, witnesses who'd disappeared or recanted. The case had fallen apart. Meridian Holdings had been dissolved, its executives scattering. Thomas Grant was listed as deceased, killed in a car accident before he could testify. But he hadn't died. He'd run. And he'd taken me with him. I found one more box, smaller than the others, sealed with tape that had yellowed with age. My hands felt numb as I opened it. Inside, a birth certificate, not mine. Another child, born the same day as me, in the same hospital. Same mother, Sarah Connolly. Twins. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the desk, trying to breathe. I had a brother. Or I'd had a brother. Past tense. Because beneath the birth certificate was a death certificate, dated 3 days after our birth. Infant mortality. Cause. Undetermined. But that didn't make sense. Why would my father run, hide, change our identities if my brother had died as an infant? Unless he hadn't died. Unless my father had taken one of us and left the other behind. I pulled out my phone with shaking hands, searching for information on Sarah Connolly. There wasn't much. She'd died young. No surviving family listed except a son. Singular. One child. Not two. My father had split us. Taken me, left my brother. Or taken my brother, left me. I looked at the photographs on the wall again, at the life he'd documented. Not out of love. Out of duty. Obligation. Making sure his choice, his sacrifice, had been worth it. The cassette recorder had more tape stacked beside it. I grabbed the most recent one, dated 6 months ago. My father's voice again, older now, tired. Henry's 34. He has no idea. I've kept him safe all these years, kept him hidden, but I don't know if it was right. I see him sometimes, distant, closed off, just like me. I made him this way. I took away his brother, his mother, his real life, and gave him nothing but shadows. A long pause. Breathing. Marcus reached out last week, after all these years. He found me. I don't know how. He says they want reconciliation, that the past is buried, but I don't trust them. I don't trust anyone who was part of Meridian. Marcus. I didn't know that name. He knows about the boys, both of them. He says Peter is alive, that they raised him, that he deserves to know the truth. Maybe he's right. Maybe I was wrong to separate them. But if I bring them together now, if I tell Henry everything, Meridian will know, and they'll come for him. The tape ended. I sat in the silence, my father's final confession hanging in the air. Peter. My brother's name was Peter, and he was alive. I spent the night in that hidden room going through every document, every photograph, every scrap of evidence my father had collected. By dawn, I'd pieced together a story that made my entire life feel like a lie. My father, Thomas Grant, had been the CFO of Meridian Holdings, an investment firm that was actually a front for laundering money for criminal organizations. He'd discovered the truth too late, after he was already complicit. When the federal investigation started, he'd cooperated, agreed to testify. That's when the threats began. Against him. Against my mother. Against us. My mother, Sarah, had given birth to twins, Peter and Henry. 3 days later, she was dead. Officially from complications, but my father's note suggested otherwise. Suggested someone had gotten to her, made it look like natural causes. So my father had run, but he couldn't take both of us. Twin infants would be too noticeable, too difficult to hide. So he'd made a choice. He'd taken me. Left Peter with someone he trusted, someone from Meridian, ironically. A man named Marcus Chen, who'd helped him disappear. The arrangement was simple. Thomas Grant would die in a staged car accident. Marcus would raise Peter as his own. And Henry Me would grow up hidden, unaware, safe. For 34 years it had worked. Until Marcus found him. Until my father realized the secret couldn't hold forever. Until he died, leaving me a key. I found Marcus Chen's address in one of the folders. He lived 2 hours away, in a suburb of New Haven. There was a photograph recent, taken from a distance. A gray-haired man, late 60s, standing in a driveway beside a younger man who looked exactly like me. Peter. My hands shook as I stared at the photograph. Same face, same build, same dark hair. A mirror image across 3 decades of separation. The notebook entry from my father's desk made sense now. If he finds it, he'll understand. Or he'll never forgive me. He'd left me the key knowing I'd find this room, discover the truth. He'd gambled that I'd want to know my brother more than I'd hate him for taking me away. I wasn't sure he'd bet correctly. I drove to New Haven in a daze, barely aware of the highway unreeling beneath me. The address led me to a quiet street lined with oak trees, houses set back from the road behind manicured lawns. Marcus Chen's house was modest, well-maintained. A blue sedan sat in the driveway. Lights were on inside. I parked across the street and sat there, engine off, trying to decide if I could actually do this. Walk up to a stranger's door and say, "What? Hi, I'm Henry Morrison, but actually I'm Henry Grant and I think you've been raising my twin brother." Before I could decide, the front door opened. A man came out. The younger man from the photograph. Peter. He was carrying a bag of garbage, walking toward the bins at the side of the house. Ordinary, mundane. He had no idea I was there, no idea his entire world was about to shift. I got out of the car. He must have heard the door close because he looked up, and for a moment we just stared at each other across the distance. I watched recognition move across his face. Confusion first, then shock, then something like understanding. He dropped the garbage bag. "Holy shit," he said. I crossed the street slowly. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. We weren't identical. His hair was slightly shorter, his face a little thinner, but we were unmistakably related. "You're Peter," I said. "You're Henry." He said it like a statement, not a question. I knew. I've known for years there was someone else. Marcus told me when I turned 18. Told me I had a brother who was hidden, protected. He said it was better if we never met. Daniel Morrison died 3 weeks ago. I know, Marcus told me. Peter's expression was complicated, grief and anger, and something else I couldn't read. I wanted to come to the funeral, but Marcus said it was too dangerous, that people might be watching. What people? Meridian, or what's left of it. He glanced back at the house. You should come inside. Marcus needs to see you. I followed him through the front door into a living room that smelled like coffee and old books. Marcus Chen was sitting in an armchair, a blanket across his lap despite the warm house. He looked frailer than his photograph, diminished by age or illness, but his eyes were sharp as they fixed on me. Henry, he said, you found the room. You knew about it? Your father and I stayed in contact. Not often, but enough. He told me he was leaving you a key, that if something happened to him, you'd find your way here. Marcus gestured to the couch. Sit, please. We have a lot to discuss. I sat. Peter settled beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. It felt strange and right at the same time. Your father was a good man in an impossible situation, Marcus began. What he did, splitting you two up, hiding Henry. It wasn't cruelty. It was survival. Meridian had already killed Sarah. If they'd known there were 2 children, they would have used both of you as leverage. So you took Peter. I owed Thomas my life. When Meridian started looking for rats, he kept my name out of it. Took heat that should have been mine. So when he asked me to raise Peter as my own, I said yes. Marcus's gaze moved to Peter, softening. It wasn't supposed to be forever. Just until the danger passed. But the danger never passed. What danger? I asked. Meridian was dissolved decades ago. The company was dissolved. The people weren't. Marcus leaned forward. Meridian was connected to some very powerful, very dangerous individuals. The kind who don't forget and don't forgive. When Thomas agreed to testify, he signed his own death warrant. They let him think he'd escaped, that faking his death was enough. But they were always watching. Waiting. For what? For him to slip up. For you to become visible. For any opportunity to recover what he took from them. I felt cold. What did he take? Marcus and Peter exchanged a glance. Information, Peter said quietly. Thomas copied Meridian's financial records before he ran. Names, account numbers, transaction histories. Everything needed to expose the entire network. He's been sitting on it for 34 years, using it as insurance. If anything happened to him or his family, the information would go public. Where is it? We don't know, Marcus admitted. Thomas never told me, said it was safer that way. But before he died, he sent me a message. He said the key would lead you to the truth, and the truth would lead you to the proof. I thought about the hidden room, the boxes, the documents. I'd been so focused on the revelation about Peter that I hadn't considered what else might be hidden there. I need to go back, I said, standing. We're coming with you, Peter said. Not a question. The three of us drove back to the house in silence. By the time we arrived, it was late afternoon, the sky taking on the bruised color of approaching evening. Inside, I led them down to the basement, through the hidden door into the secret room. Peter stopped at the threshold, staring at the photographs on the wall. He was watching you, he said softly. All those years. He knew where you were, what you were doing. He was watching both of us, Marcus corrected, pointing to another wall I hadn't noticed in my first search. More photographs. These were of Peter, growing up, going to school, college graduation. My father had been documenting both our lives, making sure his choice hadn't destroyed us. Help me search, I said. There has to be something else here, something we missed. We went through the room systematically. Marcus examined the desk while Peter and I tackled the boxes. Hours passed. The light from our phones grew dimmer as batteries drained. It was Peter who found it. Here, he said, pulling back the carpet in the corner. Underneath was a small safe embedded in the concrete, so cleverly hidden that it looked like part of the foundation. It needs a combination. Try his birthday, I suggested. Peter entered the numbers. Nothing. Sarah's birthday? Marcus tried. Still nothing. I stared at the safe, thinking. My father had left me the key to this room. What other key would he leave? Try our birthday, I said. Mine and Peter's. Peter entered the date. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single USB drive and an envelope. I took the envelope, hands shaking. Inside was a letter in my father's handwriting. Henry, if you're reading this, you found Peter. You know the truth. I expect you're angry, confused. Maybe you hate me. You have that right. I made a choice 34 years ago that shaped your entire life. I took you from your brother, from the family you should have had, and gave you isolation and secrets instead. I told myself it was to protect you, but the truth is I was protecting myself. From guilt, from consequences, from the truth that I destroyed my family trying to save it. The USB drive contains everything. Meridian's records, proof of criminal activity by some very powerful people. I've kept it hidden all these years, using it as leverage to keep you safe. But I can't protect you anymore. And I won't condemn you to living in shadow the way I did. So I'm giving you a choice. The choice I should have given you from the beginning. You can destroy the drive. Forget everything you've learned. Go back to your separate lives and let the past stay buried. Or you can expose it. Send the files to the FBI, the media, whoever will listen. Bring down what's left of Meridian and end this. But know this. If you choose exposure, there will be consequences. Powerful people will come after you, both of you. You'll have to face danger together, the way brothers should. I wish I could tell you what to do. But this choice is yours. I'm sorry. For everything. I hope someday you'll understand. Your father. I finished reading and passed the letter to Peter. He read it silently, his expression unreadable. What do we do? I asked. Peter looked at Marcus, who shook his head. I can't make this decision for you. This is between you two. Peter turned to me. I've lived my whole life knowing there was a shadow over me, knowing my father, our father, made a deal with criminals to keep us safe. I'm tired of being afraid of ghosts. You want to expose it? I want to end it. He held up the USB drive. This is the only way we'll ever be free. I thought about my father, spending decades hiding, watching from the margins, never able to fully live. I thought about the secret room, the documented lives, the constant vigilance. I thought about the future mine and Peter's, together or separate, free or haunted. Okay, I said. Let's end it. We drove to the FBI field office in Hartford the next morning. The agents were skeptical at first until we showed them the drive. Then skepticism turned to shock, then urgency. Phone calls were made. Lawyers were summoned. By evening, we were in protective custody while federal prosecutors began building cases. The files my father had saved were devastating. They connected Meridian to dozens of crimes: fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, connections to organized crime. But more than that, they named names: judges, politicians, business leaders, people who'd thought their secrets were buried. Within a week, arrests began. The media descended. Peter and I gave depositions, testimony, interviews. We told the story of Thomas Grant and his sons, the choice he'd made and the choice we'd unmade. Not everyone was happy. We received threats anonymous at first, then increasingly direct. The FBI kept us under protection, but we both knew it couldn't last forever. Eventually, we'd have to face the consequences of what we'd done. But we'd face them together. 6 months later, Peter and I stood in the cemetery where our father was buried. It was the first time we'd visited together. The headstone read, Daniel Morrison, not his real name, but the one he'd chosen, the identity he'd worn for most of his life. Do you think he knew, Peter asked, that we'd choose this? I think he hoped, I said. Otherwise, he wouldn't have left the key. We stood in silence, two brothers trying to understand a father who'd loved them enough to tear them apart. I found something last week, Peter said finally. Going through Marcus's things. He's not doing well. The cancer is spreading. He wanted me to give you this. He handed me a photograph. It was old, faded, showing a young couple holding 2 infants. The man was my father, Thomas Grant, not yet Daniel Morrison. The woman was Sarah Connolly, our mother, smiling despite the exhaustion in her eyes. And the babies. One in each parent's arms. Together. He kept it all these years, Peter said. Proof that we existed, that we were a family, even if just for a few days. I stared at the photograph, at the people we'd been before everything fell apart, before choices and consequences and secrets. We should have grown up together, I said. Yeah, Peter agreed. But we're together now. That has to count for something. He was right. The past couldn't be changed. Our father's choices had shaped us, for better and worse. But the future, that was ours to write. We walked back to the car together, leaving Daniel Morrison behind in the peaceful silence of the cemetery. Ahead of us, a different kind of silence waited. The silence of secrets finally revealed, of burdens finally shared. The silence of truth. Epilogue. 2 years after we exposed Meridian's crimes, I stood in the house where I'd grown up, where Daniel Morrison had raised me in careful isolation. It was empty now, cleared of furniture and memories, ready for new owners. Peter came down the basement stairs carrying the last box. That's everything, he said. The hidden room is sealed. No one will know it was ever there. We'd debated what to do with the evidence. The FBI had copies, but the originals, the physical documents, the photographs, the tapes, those we'd decided to destroy. Some secrets didn't need to be preserved. Strange, I said, looking around the empty basement. This place defined so much of my life. Now it's just a room. It was never just a room, Peter corrected. It was a choice our father made, just one of many. We climbed the stairs together and stepped out into afternoon sunlight. The house would be sold. The past would be buried properly this time, without secrets or lies. Marcus had died 4 months ago, peacefully, with Peter by his side. In his will, he'd left us both a letter, a final explanation, a final apology. He'd loved Peter like a son. He'd watched over me from a distance. He'd honored Thomas Grant's desperate bargain until the very end. You ever wonder what our lives would have been like? Peter asked as we drove away. If things had been different, if we'd grown up together. Sometimes, I admitted, but I'm learning to live with what is instead of what might have been. Peter nodded. That's all any of us can do. We drove in comfortable silence, two brothers who'd lost 34 years but found each other in the end. Our father's legacy wasn't the secrets he'd kept or the choices he'd made. It was us, together, finally, facing forward. The second key had opened more than a door. It had opened a path back to family, back to truth, back to ourselves. And that, perhaps, was what Daniel Morrison had hoped for all along.